when men have a daughter, often even stronger with a firstborn daughter, but when men have a daughter, they tend to become less supportive of traditional gender roles, right? Much more open to thinking about um, roles not defined by your gender. And they start becoming more supportive of things like anti discrimination laws, equal pay policies, sexual harassment enforcement.
And take six. Welcome to another edition of the podcast known as Blending the Family. I am your host, Tommy Maloney. Thank you for coming by. Thanks for downloading this episode. Maybe you're out on a run. Maybe you're out on a walk. Maybe you're walking, I don't know, the kangaroo. Thank you so much for your support. Today, on this episode, we have Professor Michelle Travis. She's a law professor at the University of San Francisco School of Law, one of my favorite towns, one of my favorite airports of San Francisco. She has a new book out called Dads for Daughters. You can find her at michelletravis.net. That's michelletravis.net. And just go to LinkedIn. That's where I find a lot of these great guests to have the conversation with. Go to LinkedIn. Tell her that you love this episode. I know you haven't heard it yet, but just go ahead and tell her. Anyway, Professor Travis, new book, Dads for Daughters. And is that my phone? Yeah, my phone. Anyway, sorry. Where are we at? Hey, I'm recording this the day after St. Patrick's Day. I am good. I'm fine. Had wine last night. My wife had picked up a while back a bottle of red. One of my favorite grapes is Tempranillo. So we had some Tempranillo last night. I made pasta. Well, I didn't make the pasta. I boiled the water, that thing, but I used pesto sauce. I can't use, I can't eat red sauce. It messes up my tummy. Anyway, made a salad. Yeah. So that's how we celebrated St. Patty's Day last night, eating pasta and drinking wine. I occasionally will drink beer. Actually, we went out with some friends this past week, and I asked for a Guinness. I have no idea what they gave me. No clue. It did not taste like Guinness. So they were trying to figure out what's going on, and I'm like, you know what? Just give me a glass of wine. Let me just have wine, and I was happy, really happy. Speaking of happy, my wife got some great news. I don't want to mention specifics yet, but we have a family member who apparently is going to be having a baby, and my wife received the ultrasound, and apparently it's going to be not a puppy. I was disappointed. I would even say maybe an iguana, but it's going to be a baby boy. He's going to be a baby boy, and ironically, the due date is my wife's birthday in September. So that's wonderful news. I just want to give you an update on the book. The book, My Dad's Advice at 5:04 a.m. that we've been talking about for 15, 20 years. Yesterday, I received a documentation showing the design, the interior design, and I am so excited about it. It's I don't want to give too much away, but each chapter has not a logo, but like this little design. Anyway, I hope you understand when you get the book that this little design thing. So I am excited because we are, and I know I've been saying this a lot, but I don't want to really get into the weeds of that. But let's just say we're closer. We're closer to the book, My Dad's Advice at 5:04 a.m., finally coming out. Professor Michelle Travis, again, law professor at the University of San Francisco School of Law. On this episode, we talked about paid family leave, why our country here in the great states of America, why we're so far behind. So her new book Dads for Daughters. I asked her, were there some common threads of the stories from dads? And also, my curiosity, she does a lot of research on gender equality. And my question to her during this episode was, what was your relationship like with your own dad? And it was really cool how she opened up on talking about her dad and spending time with him during a summer internship. So, again, Professor Michelle Travis, you can get more information about her information as far as the San Francisco School of Law at michelletravis.net. Michelletravis.net. I think that's it. That's all I want to say. We've talked way too much. We have. It's time to throw out the phrase that pays, as I would used to say in my radio days. Wow, that's a lot of rhyming, and I apologize. Terry Crews. I heard an interview with him many moons ago, and he was talking about his success being somebody else's success and vice versa. And I started thinking more and more about the phrase of your success is my success, and especially coming from this episode and being a parent. If you're a parent, you know, you want your kids to be successful, but we also want them to learn, and we talk about this in this episode about failing. Going forward today, I want you to think about the Terry Crews quote. As a parent, if your kids are successful, are you successful? Think about that. So, there we go. As Terry Crews would say, your success is my success. You know what? I failed. Do I address you as Professor Michelle, Professor Travis, Michelle? How am I
Michelle.
supposed?
Michelle works fine.
Okay. I was like, you're a professor, so
I
I
appreciate the
need to.
question though.
I
Yeah,
do need to respect it.
it's I very much appreciate it. Not everyone asks, and I so very much appreciated.
Well, I'm happy we can just go, like Cher and Bono, and just use first names.
There we go. We're at that level.
Before we get to the hard hitting questions about your latest book, Dads for Daughters, I have to start off with the one thing I see a lot in bios. We talk about our pets and how much we love our pets, and we give them little goofy, things about them, but we don't put names. Michelle, what's the name of the chinchilla?
The name of the chinchilla is the somewhat uninspired Chinchi.
Chinchi.
Yes, which was named by my daughters when they were very young.
And the name of your golden doodle?
Is Tucker.
Gotta give credit where credit's due in the animal world.
Yes. Yes, and our golden doodle is our pandemic puppy. Our family, along with many others, had a puppy join us during the pandemic, and
We're guilty as well.
yes, but brought
Yes,
a lot of joy, a lot of joy.
they do. They do. And I actually closed my office door because I was afraid. I don't know what it is, but our dog Otis, when he knows I'm recording, he likes to say, well, I want to go outside. And I'm like, no, I'm recording. We don't have time for this. So, but I
They
do
know.
appreciate it. I do appreciate your time today, Michelle.
Well,
And
thank you.
this is, I'm excited because you're going to inspire so many dads, including myself, with your book, Dads for Daughters. So, I don't know where to start other than so you are a professor of law at University of San Francisco. Let's take a step back though before we dive into the book. So, how did you get into that particular niche of the law of employment discrimination? How did that come about?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me. I hope that the book will inspire dads, in part because dads have inspired me through this project. So, yes, I am a law professor by day, and I research and study and teach about employment law, employment discrimination. Previously, I was a practicing lawyer, practicing employment law, and my journey to thinking about gender equality in the workplace came both through my own work experience, researching the law, listening to my employer clients, listening to my women colleagues, listening to my students who were heading out into the legal profession, and really seeing these incredible women who were skilled and dedicated and committed, but yet still facing a lot of inequalities, particularly in the workplace, and really trying to figure out, as a lawyer, as a law professor, what could I bring to that conversation? What could I do? Now, you might say that seems like a long way away from a book that's about dads of daughters. So, that connection, I think, is one that surprised a lot of folks. I've been studying gender equality in the workplace for many decades, and over time, I really realized that I found myself in a lot of rooms with women talking to other women, and talking to a lot of people in the legal profession, lawyers, judges, litigators. And I realized, we're not making that much progress. There's really some missing folks in the room that we really need to engage. And I realized we need to be talking to men, men in positions of power. And by power, I mean not just in the workplace or in your communities, but in your homes, right? Where you have so much influence in your role as a dad and may not even realize it. So I started thinking I need to engage men in conversations of gender equity if we're going to really make some progress on creating a more gender equitable world, which benefits not just girls and women, but also boys and men. And but how do I do that? I really need to find ways to meet men where they're at. And one of the best ways to do that, I found, was to engage men as dads, right? That was something that men care deeply about, they're interested in, and it turned out to be a really great window into talking about issues involving gender equity as dads started thinking about what do I want the world to look like for my kids, for my daughter.
Well, this is a great conversation because I come from the world of having a son.
Yes.
And after I got remarried, I went from having a son to two incredible, intelligent, strong
Yes.
bonus daughters.
Hmm.
And that's something that really drew me to, learning more about you and learning about your book, Dads for Daughters. What was there a common thread throughout the book that you learned from dads with daughters? And again, you have two daughters, so was there something that you also learned talking to these dads?
Yes. Well, your story is such a fascinating one. I think blended families are so common now, and there's something. I'm sure there's unique challenges, but also this unique opportunity because it is this moment where you pause and think about in a very deep way, building a parenting relationship in a way that hasn't started from scratch. So it's such a fantastic opening for deep thought about what do I want to be as a dad? What do I want to accomplish? So one of the common threads that I've seen in my research for the book and then in talking with dads of daughters is the way that having a daughter enter your life, in whatever way they come into your life, really has this deeply transformative effect on dads, whether consciously or not. So one of the first studies that I read that made me think, wow, there's something about this relationship that could be an opening into thinking about how do we engage men as gender equity advocates, was that researchers have found again and again that when men have a daughter, often even stronger with a firstborn daughter, but when men have a daughter, they tend to become less supportive of traditional gender roles, right? Much more open to thinking about um, roles not defined by your gender. And they start becoming more supportive of things like anti discrimination laws, equal pay policies, sexual harassment enforcement. And that theme of sort of this unconscious shift that happens where you just start thinking looking and perceiving the world through a different lens. One of the dads that I talked to, his name's Jason Kyler. He is in the entertainment industry. He said that he used the phrase, "My antenna." Were more attuned to seeing the world in a way that I didn't before. And that theme resonated from dads of every walk of life, every background, every arena in which dads operate, whether it's at their home, in their communities, in their workplace. They said, I started seeing things differently, right? It was this new lens that I looked at in the world. And that allowed me to start thinking about how we might be able to really have women partner with men to think about gender equity and think about what changes might we be able to make together to break down gender role stereotypes and allow not just girls to be everything that they want to be, but also to free up boys, right, from the gender stereotypes that are also restricting to them. So I came at this through dads of daughters, but I think the book hopefully speaks to dads of sons as well, because the ultimate goal is really thinking about how do we free up people from these gender role stereotypes, and empower our kids and the world, make changes in the world that we live in to let everyone be their authentic selves, not limited by gender role expectations.
Well, I agree with you as far when you talk about the benefit of your book, not for just dads of daughters, but sons as well. Because the one thing I learned, um, helping, it's really hard for me. I don't know if it's a guy thing or if it's just the way I'm weirdly wired. I don't like to take a lot of credit with the girls because I don't know. Yeah, I'm again weird in that way, Michelle. But the one thing uh, I learned having two daughters is the way they have to decompress during a day. And it was interesting because the oldest, Betsy, she would come home from school and she would get right to the homework right away. And then the the other one, Becca, when she came home from school, she had to turn on the TV and decompress. Well, the good thing is I got to watch the two of them and then see how my son is with the same situations as far as what he needed to do when he was done with school. And he's a firstborn. So he was very similar to Betsy in the fact that as soon as he got done with school, he was at the homework. But when it came to emotions, that was something totally different for me because, you know, I don't want to say I was that typical man dad, hey, just rub some dirt on it or, I'll give you something to cry about. When the girls would get upset, I did not know how to handle it. It was a different world. And I think going back to your point of, I wasn't there, day one with them, I'm, halfway between their lives. And it's like, holy crap, I don't know what to do.
Yes, I love you're sharing this personal experience, which I think is going to resonate with so many dads out there. One of the words that I loved that you used the most was you said, "I would watch this," and so important. I think one of the things that I learned from dads who, in the book, who were learning or getting motivated by having daughters to think more about gender equity in their homes and in their workplaces was that they watched more than trying to take action, at least initially, right? They listened more than talked. And that's so powerful, so powerful. And the other thing that you're describing that was a kind of a theme in my book, both a starting and an ending place for many of the dads of daughters who became very powerful gender equity advocates in various ways, was really. seeing how, in some ways, you said your daughters had to decompress during the day and in different ways, and in part that's because they're navigating a world, whether it's school now, workplace in the future, that largely is built by men, around men, for boys, etc. And so there's a performative aspect that a lot of girls and women have to play, that's exhausting, and we don't realize that or see that or know that. And then we see, well, they come home and they're exhausted and they need that decompression time. But one of the things that you're describing in your ability to see these differences between your sons and your daughters and their needs is, the biggest and most important message that I got from the research in my book was the way in which, being an engaged dad, the way you are, builds empathy. And empathy, is, as you know, that ability to really be able to step back and feel what someone else is feeling. And that is the skill that I've seen allows men to become gender equity advocates in their workplaces, in their communities, in their world, on behalf of their daughters and their sons. Right. And empathy is a leadership skill, and we undervalue it as a leadership skill. But I think the biggest way to learn empathy is through what you're describing, right? Sitting back, watching, learning, engaging, with your kids in that dad role. Love it.
Thank you. And one of the things in your bio, you're a former collegiate gymnast. Well, both the girls went and they did gymnastics, and I firmly believe, and again, this is coming from in my world, being a bonus parent of supporting the kids, and I'm a huge advocate. I don't care if they're blood related or not. You have to support them, even in as as dads. We want to be at the sporting events. We want to be rooting and cheering, and so for me, that was a totally different world of the world of gymnastics. And again, being there supporting them, they would do one event, and then 3 hours later
Yes.
the next event, and it's like, oh dear God, this
Yes.
is taking way too long.
It takes a
Versus
lot of tenacity and
it
patience.
does. Oh my gosh. And my son plays hockey, and within the hour it's over. It's
Yes.
great. We move on. We're at lunch. And with gymnastics, again, you see you see the emotions. And again, raising a son and then getting into the world of womanhood and it's like I, I this is my usual standard statement when I have wonderful authors on this podcast, and as I really wish I had your book when I needed it, and I really wish I had your book many moons ago. So how can we dads, how can we men help our daughters go through their emotions, highs and lows? Now, granted, I read a lot of Stoic philosophy, which has really helped me have my calm moments. How can you, with the book, how can you help us dads out there deal with emotions? Now, I'm gonna add a caveat to it. We have a wedding coming up this year too, so I know there's gonna be even more highs and lows.
Yes. I love the story. One of my daughters did gymnastics for a very long time. The other played basketball. So I know this difference in phenomenon too. Absolutely. And, and I have to say the emotion part, I have two teenage daughters now. So, right there with you on that piece of it. The fact that you're asking the question is the most important part, right? The most important part. And I think one of the, things that I learned from talking to dads of daughters who've been quite successful in going through this journey, one is to listen more than talk, right? You don't have to fix problems. We have this sense of, I think it's a gender role stereotype, right? That men need to fix the problems. You don't need to be a
Yes,
fixer,
yes,
right? You don't need to
and
be.
yeah, I'm
Mhm.
sorry to interrupt, but you're
Yeah, go ahead.
right,
Hmm.
because I
It's
when
an
my
expectation.
wife and I first got married, I didn't. consider myself a fixer. I
Right.
mean, heck, I mean, even when it comes to home improvement, I have two left hands. But I will remember a specific time we got into a heated argument, and she said to me, "I just want you to listen. I don't want you to fix it." And I'm just sitting there going, "But, but I want to help."
Right. Yes, and this is part of these gender role stereotypes, those expectations that we have all learned. Right, we've learned in the same way that men learn that they're expected to be providers, right, breadwinners, and that makes it much more difficult for men to take family leave from work, for example. Right. And so to actually articulate those, talk about them, and understand where they come from is enormously important. The other thing that I've learned from talking to dads of daughters who have been particularly successful in really thinking through these kind of notions of masculinity and femininity and what it means to live up to these expectations, though, is one of the ways that you can support your daughters through their emotional journey is to share with them your emotional journey, to that it's okay to show that you're an emotional being as well. Also, something that for some is hard to do because we've trained men not to do that. Right? But that can be incredibly effective. And I will also say, I'm going to just go back to the sports for 1 minute, because you started the sports with the sort of the window into this larger question. But going back to that smaller platform, sports is such a phenomenal way for dads to connect with their daughters if that's something that they're interested in, to foster that. Being there in the stands, supporting your daughter, even for the 1 minute that she's on balance beam in the 4 hours of the day,
Yes.
that is gender equity work, right? That's gender equity work. It's important work. It is allowing her to be a fierce competitor in ways that society has told her she should not be. Um, and and so know that those moments have both small payouts in the sense of you're there to support her in that moment when she needed you, but also bigger payoffs in thinking about your role as a dad in creating a more equitable world where you want all of your kids to grow up into. That's gender equity work. So I want to just celebrate that as well.
Well, and I know as dads, as men, we want to be at the sporting events, but at the same time, it's important for our kids to find their paths. And the flip side to it, Michelle, is both girls were in choir, they're in band, and as much as we men, we want to be at the sporting events, preferably, but we still need to be there even if they're doing other types of extracurricular activities to show our kids that we are there supporting them.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Also, I think one of the important themes coming out of conversations and research that I've had, the phrase that you're using, allow them to find their paths, is such a powerful phrase and a great mantra, I think, for dads who are thinking about how do I battle against kind of an inequitable world and create a sort of a level playing field where my kids, my daughters in particular, can find their path unencumbered by expectations because of their gender. And you do that by showing up at wherever they're interested in, whatever that might be. Another thing that just advice I'd add to that, especially if you're starting with very young kids and you're you don't know what their path is, and you want to make sure that you are not part of the society that's unconsciously directing their path in various ways. So one of the things that I think is a great way for dads to do important gender equity work, especially with younger kids, is to really allow their kids to um, engage in all kinds of different activities, not limited by their gender or gender expectations, to have books available that show girls and boys in all kinds of roles. Some of the dads of daughters that I talked to that were my most favorite stories in the book were dads who thought that there wasn't enough STEM books out there for kids, for girls to see themselves as future scientists and future engineers, future entrepreneurs. So they wrote books and comic books. One of my favorites is Ella the Engineer, which a dad of a daughter wrote because he thought, I just need her to see something that so she could imagine herself potentially as an engineer. And he said not to force her down that path, but to allow her to see herself in every path so she can make an informed and free choice, right? So thinking about activities that you might do with your kids that are not necessarily the ones we always think about with a girl or with a boy. I always tell dad, say, what can I do to advance gender equity in my home? And I said, well, um, go build something with your daughter, right? Then she might imagine herself as an engineer and push back on that stereotype. Do a science experiment with her in the kitchen. Do a debate, have a fierce debate with your daughter, right? She might see herself as a politician then. Play a video game and compete fiercely with her in the same way you'd compete fiercely with your son, right? And vice versa, right? For your sons, get them something to take care of, to care for, like a pet, right? Get them in a caregiving role. And this is again not to push them into a certain path, but to allow them to know that every path is open to them, when they're repeatedly getting messaging from schools and from media and from TV and et cetera, that there's only certain paths. And that's why your phrase that you used, find their paths, I mean, is so incredibly important and powerful.
I'm going to add another activity.
Yes.
This might sound bizarre, Michelle, but I mean this because my wife is in a axe throwing league,
I love this. Yes, yes, yes.
and so this past Tuesday, I when I'm not on the road for work, I look forward to Tuesdays to be there to support my wife and her team. Well, unfortunately, one of the teams they were playing against was short a person, and I had played on their team once before. I come from the world of playing hockey, and even though I was a goalie, I love that. I love being on the ice, and I love the speed, and I love the contact. To me, axe throwing is not that. To
Yes.
me, axe throwing is you sit there and you drink some beers and you just have fun. Well, so I filled in for a team and they pinned me against my daughter Becca, and I could see her competitiveness come out, and it was beautiful because I have this the last time I filled in, uh, I they had me head to head against my wife, and she kicked my ass. And this past Tuesday, Becca kicked my ass, and to me, I have no ego because I know I'm not turning professional tomorrow in
Yeah.
axe throwing.
Throwing.
Yeah, right. Right up there with I'm not turning professional playing cornhole. Um, I see something like that where like you were talking about the video games. When you do have that healthy competition,
Yes.
you know, and even if you get beat, that's great.
Yes.
I'm gonna tell you, axe throwing. That's gonna be the next, I think, marriage counseling uh, phenomenon.
I think this is fabulous, and I wish I had talked to you before I written this book because that would have definitely been in there as one of my, tips and advice of something that you can do. The other thing that's so powerful about your story is, you had to make yourself vulnerable, right? You had to set ego aside, and that is such great modeling for daughters in particular. As you were going through this, what is also just a fun and fierce and competition, allowing girls to compete, you being vulnerable, you entering into something that maybe you're not phenomenally skilled at,
Oh, not
all of
even
those
close.
things,
Not even
right?
close.
Those are things that are really empowering daughters in a huge way, because those are the kinds of barriers that women face as they're girls and women face as they're as they're going through the world. In the book, I actually cite research about the important skills that are built for girls who compete in sports, whatever they may be. And they didn't really talk about axe throwing, but I'm sure the same skills apply there. And if you actually look at women CEOs, of which there are unfortunately not that many in large companies, but there's an incredibly high percentage of women who make it into the C suite who competed as athletes before. And they cite their sports experience as part of their skill building, right? It teaches them to be competitive, it teaches them to lose, right? And to get back up again. It's confidence, it's goal setting, it's all of that is actually really important skills that actually translate into the boardroom incredibly effectively. So you were doing that as well as you took that loss on your shoulder.
That's okay. Like you said, I have no ego in that. I just, like I said, I go there, support, have a couple beers, and go. All right,
Fantastic.
it's all good. Um, Not to put you on the spot, Michelle, but did you have any? Again, in my world, we don't use the word step. We've never believed in the word step. We always felt just in our world that it was
Mhm.
a negative word.
Yes.
But in your book, were there opportunities to interview bonus dads?
Um, I do not recall any of them actually talking about their children in terms of, how the children came into their lives in different ways. Though I very highly suspect that many of the dads that I talked to, just given the commonality of those kinds of family relationships, had families that were blended in a variety of different ways. And I suspect that those fathers are actually ones who because you have this sort of important shifting moment in your life, think more, even more deeply, have this moment of thinking about what do I want to be as a dad? What is this role? How is this role bigger than myself and bigger than even this relationship?
What um, what values or virtues have you and your husband instilled into your daughters?
Yes, I love that. And I will say my husband was also a motivator for this book and this research, because as I was starting to shift my research to thinking about how do I engage men into gender equity advocacy, I was actually watching the effect that my two daughters were having on my husband. And my husband is a lawyer at a large law firm. And of course, long before we had kids, I had his ear about the importance of having gender equitable partnership ranks and et cetera. And of course, he had always agreed with that as an important goal. But it wasn't until we had two girls that I saw him really sort of taking ownership of it as not an sort of intellectual challenge, but as something that he had a responsibility to work on, as something. It's like daughters gave him urgency to really act on his beliefs about gender equity as a good, and concretely. So I love that you're asking about him and I together as partners and thinking about our values. I would say I mentioned this before, but I think the biggest value that we try to instill is empathy. And I think empathy is something that he and I are continuing to work on as they grow and now as our teens. So and I think it's important to think of it as a skill, not just a characteristic. It's a skill like any other sports skill, probably like axe throwing, that you can improve at, that you can grow, you can work on it, you can get better at it. And I think empathy is something that opens us up to deeper and more powerful relationships with others. And now I am really, really seeing it as a leadership skill to become a leader in whatever arena that my kids want to go out and be a leader in. Empathy is really a requirement for that. So I would say that's probably the top thing. Um, I would say meeting others where they're at and acceptance. That's also very important. Um, We like to talk about pushing ourselves out of our comfort zone, because that's how we learn, kind of be lifelong learners. And I find that, that's something that actually gets more challenging in some ways as you get older, potentially, because you start finding the things that you're good at, and that's what you do. So pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, in order to learn and grow. So those are probably the things that we um, care about as shared values, as we think about parenting daughters.
What was your relationship like with your father?
Yes, such a great question. So my father um, a very traditional in the sense that he perceived his role as a dad first and foremost as a provider, as a financial provider. And this is something and he did that very well. So he worked very hard. He was a um, computer programmer, and that is the initial part of our relationship, I think. And um, I saw a shift in him over time I would really say, as I became um, a high school student and then started having aspirations to go to college and law school, where he suddenly started thinking, you know, he wanted to be involved more in sharing my dreams with me and supporting my dreams in ways other than just financial support. And I love that transformation. There was a moment in high school where I needed a high school job, and there was a scholarship available at the company that he worked on. He worked at IBM, big with those early tech companies, and there was a scholarship available for students who were going to college, which I received. And so I worked at his workplace for a summer as like a summer intern, and we got to drive to work together every day and drive home from work every day during one summer, and that profoundly changed our relationship. I discovered that he was funny, and clever, and he liked puns, which I never knew. And so it was definitely this evolving relationship. And I see this actually, in some of the research that I'm doing. There's surveys of dads now, that this to me is really exciting. When you ask dads, what is the most important thing to you or role to you, as a dad, what's the most important thing that you do? And historically, the top answer, among it's like a list of things you can select from. The top answer has always been financially providing for my family, always number one. Now we started seeing a shift, and particularly in the pandemic, this actually accelerated. Many more dads are saying the most important thing to me is to support my kids, to feel close to my kids, to show love and affection is climbing up the list, right? We've never seen that. Show love and affection to my kids. I saw this transformation with my dad in terms of his relationship with me over time. And I would say he was probably the person in my life most excited when I got accepted to law school and said I was going to become a lawyer. Yeah.
I just want to piggyback on when you're talking about the survey. You know, I would definitely say for me is the love and support and just
Mhm.
letting our kids, you know, learn to fail.
Yes.
Um,
Learn to fail.
so like for example, our son right now he's in a little bit of a transition. He's away at college and he's trying to figure out, he wants to stay in this hockey journey. And my mom, his grandmother, is like, no, no, no. Your dad didn't graduate from college because he took a gap year off and never went back, which wasn't true. I did take some classes, but she sees what I went through and she doesn't want, her grandson to go through it. But for me, I look at all three kids equally going, do what you want to do. Do it now because as you get older, you're going to have to really have, a job and, pay rent and all that. But you're young right now. Take advantage of, you know, do some soul searching. What is it you want to do? Because I, unfortunately, I learned late in life. I was not meant to be in a college. I am not a I'm not a person that could sit in a cubicle farm. I don't like to be confined. I occasionally I will find myself enjoying, getting up at 3 a.m. to go catch the first flight out of, Denver airport. But for the most part, as I've gotten older, not wiser, just older, is I like being home. I love being home, but I want our kids to explore and be able to say, let me go try this. And if I fail, I fail. And I feel that a lot of parents, not to
Mhm.
use that generalization, but I feel that a lot of parents don't allow their kids to fail.
Yeah. Absolutely. And there's something about the word itself, right? Fail, that I almost feel like we need a new word for it, right? Because changing the connotation of it is so hard to do. But that's how we learn, right? And I think you hear tech leaders now saying, fail often and fail quickly, right? Because
Yes,
that's how you
yes.
learn. Yes. And why do we just do that well, we're trying to create a new tech gadget, right? Why don't we do that in life? And I think that's a difficult thing for parents, um, because we want so much for our kids. We want so much for our kids, but to understand that what we want is for them, as you said before, to find their path. And to do that, being on some, linear constructed method is not always the right way to go. I'll say that this is really confirmed for me. So I'm a law professor by day, so I advise a lot of law students, and I cannot tell you how many first year law students after a semester or a year come to me and say, I'm not sure I really want to do this, but I'm committed to it. So let me make it through this. And I say, well, why did you come to law school? And they say, I don't know. It's what I had always planned to do. It was always my plan. And I thought, why does it always have to be your plan? Plans change. And I think that's something that, maybe it's my generation too, where we having a linear path was valued in certain ways. So I think that's a fantastic lesson that you're teaching your kids, and I think that's also really important. I always look through gender equity lenses, and I think that letting your kids learn to fail, encouraging them that that's not actually what we mean by failure. That means, oh, you've just learned, and learning what you don't want to do is probably even more important to finding what you do want to do than staying in a path that you're unsure of. That's enormous growth, enormous learning. And that's particularly important because we find ourselves often going down certain paths out of gendered expectations, right? Out of gender expectations. Many other paths that are carved out for us, but gender does it as well. And so by allowing people to try something new, fail, try something else new, explore, that's also gender equity work. So yes, I'm with you. But it's hard to do as a parent, isn't it?
Oh, it is
Yeah.
because as a parent, we want our kids to be successful. We want
Yes.
them to, you know, make tons of money and be
Hmm.
happy. And we all know that that's not true. That making money doesn't mean you're happy. But yeah, it's really
It's hard to
hard
break out of
because
it. Yeah.
it is. Especially when you've seen your own failures and you've seen that you know you're not where you want to be in life, and then you see your kids and you're like, and you want to push them and you want
Yes.
them to be successful, but at the same time they have to do it on their own. They have to figure it out on their own. They have to get to law school and go, I'd rather be a baker.
Yes. Yes. Exactly.
um Something you mentioned earlier, and love to hear your opinion on this: family leave. Why, in your view, why is America so far
Oh.
behind on family leave? I mean, when my son was born, I well, it was I grew up as an only child. I never babysat, and I went to my former spouse and said, I want to be a stay at home dad. And she looked at me like I had a third eye, but that's what I wanted to do. But at the same time, like you were talking about your dad, we had to be providers still. And
Mhm.
why are we so far behind on family leave?
Yes, I appreciate this question so much because this has been um, one of my lifelong goals is to move our country forward on family leave, and not just family leave, paid family leave, and family leave for all caregivers. And it's really, really important that we think about family leave as something that's not just for women, but also for men. That's the only way it's going to work. And all of the data, universally, 100%, all the data shows that family leave is beneficial to kids, to families, to relationships, to businesses, and to communities and societies in general. So, why are we so far behind? I think this is something very uniquely American. And you are absolutely correct. We are behind every other developed nation in the world when it comes to having available paid family leave. We're just rock bottom. And so, why is that? There's something uniquely American about this notion of, I think, part of where it stems, two parts. One is this notion that kids are sort of your private endeavor and you need to deal with your kids on your own, right? Whereas many other countries view kids as a public good, right? They're a public good that we're all investing in together. And until we sort of understand that and make that shift from kids being your kind of private thing that you deal with to being a public good that we as a nation invest in, it's going to be hard to make big progress on that. And secondly, I think this stereotypes are so strong here that they have made it difficult for you to do something that was incredibly gender forward, which is to say things like, I want to take leave as a dad. I want to be a stay at home dad for a period of time. I want to have a career off ramp. I want to have a career on ramp. Men don't do that by and large. And why is that? It's not because they don't want to be engaged fathers and engaged with their family. It's because the consequences of doing so in terms of their career are very, very steep. Men who take family leave or time off to care for families actually end up experiencing greater stigma at work, greater negative consequences in terms of pay and promotion than women do. And we know that women take a hit for taking leave. So you combine those things together and you can see how far we are behind. But I would say if there is one thing that fathers could do to think long term in terms of gender equity in our country, it is to support, advocate for family leave. If you are privileged enough in our country to have some form of family leave, take it. Take every day of it, which is not an easy thing to do, right? Because there's sometimes negative consequences that come from that at your work. But to advocate for that, for to think about when you're at the voting booth, voting for people who will support family leave. And just to be clear, why is this so important? The data does show that when women and men take family leave, their kids are healthier. They have stronger long term bonds with their kids. They have stronger relationships with their partners, right, with each other. When men take family leave, say for a newborn child, or when you adopt the child, or a new child comes in your life, it actually increases maternal depression, improves mother's health, actually physical health. And this is also something that in the long term will allow us to have more gender equitable workplaces if we start building workplaces around working caregivers, right? Around working caregivers. We construct them around working caregivers. We will have just much more equitable workplaces. So I'm so glad you brought that up. That is, I think, number one policy agenda if you're a dad who's thinking about what can I do on the policy side.
It's funny because I didn't really understand uh, gender inequality until I went back to the workforce and they saw the gaps in my resume and they're like, "Well, what have you done the past 2 years?" I said, "I was a stay-at-home dad," and they're like, "Why?" And I'm like, "What do you mean
Yes,
why?
yes.
Hello, what?"
Yes, why? Because so easy to be caring for my kids. That is such an eye-opening moment for you. And women face that all the time because women still, on average, tend to take leave more than men, right? And the phrase that you're using, resume gap, is something that itself is illuminating as to gender equality, inequality. And for you, for them to be saying a particular why, well, why you in particular, is even a stronger question mark for you than if a woman does it. Definitely a question mark for women. One of my long-term goals, conversations that I'm trying to get started with workplaces with parents, is to start really actually thinking about parenting, caregiving work of all shapes and sizes as work. Right, it is a form of work and it builds skills. So that, and why that's important is that when you have a quote resume gap where you were actually being a stay-at-home parent, for example, if we thought of that as work, right, that conversation you had would have looked a lot different, right? It would have been about the project management skills that you actually developed really profoundly well while you were parenting, right? The budget management, the empathy, patience, and creativity that you developed, right? It's skill building. It's skill building because it's work.
Time
Um,
management.
time
Time
management,
management.
time management. Yes. Yes. So we have a long way to go. But one of the things when we talk about these issues, they seem so big and daunting. But I will say very small things that individuals, dads can do can have a big impact. So, for example, um, putting dad on your resume, right, on your LinkedIn profile, on your bio, right, dad, powerful. It indicates that that is something in your work history that you're proud of, that was skill building, and that people should value, and that will, it's just something as small as that can actually over time have a big impact.
It's funny you say that since I do have that on my LinkedIn
Excellent.
profile.
You're ahead. It matters. It really does.
One question I'm dying to ask that really isn't on topic, but it's probably selfish of me, but I have to ask. You write a lot, Michelle. What is your writing process?
Yes, I think all writers ask this question of all other writers because we all imagine that there's a better way than we're and a more efficient way than we're doing it ourselves, right?
Hello, that's why I'm asking.
We all have this imaginary world that there's got to be an easier way to write. It's just hard. Writing is hard.
Hmm.
So I will say my process tends to be I usually start with research. And then with research and anecdotes, and that's what builds writing for me. So I actually have a folder, and by folder I mean a actual like cardboard hard folder, real folder that you can hold in your hands, not on my computer, where I print out and throw in anything that has grabbed my attention. So for dads of daughters, the first thing that went in there was the study I read that when dads have a daughter, they become less supportive of traditional gender roles, right? They're more willing to shake up traditional gender roles. So I put that in a folder and I thought that's interesting. Then I found another study that said CEOs who are dads of daughters have a smaller gender pay gap in their company than companies run by other men. Printed that out, put it in the folder. I said, oh, that's interesting, right? I found another study that said venture capital firms that have senior partners who are dads of daughters tend to hire more women into their partnerships. And those women tend to invest in companies run by women. Wow, that's interesting. I threw it in the folder. So when my folder starts overflowing, right, when things are actually falling out of it, can't close anymore, I say that's the time for me to write a book. And so then I pull out all of these articles and try to piece it together in a book. The other thing that goes into my folder actually is interview notes. So I feel like, particular when I'm writing a topic, I need to understand stories of the people who have lived it. If I'm writing about dads of daughters, I need to be talking about dads of daughters. I really think of the book more as sharing stories of dads with other dads. So interview notes, throw them in the folder. So I actually like this hard copy folder. of actually printed out things. And when it starts overflowing, that's when I sit down and say, time to start writing. Not a very efficient process or elegant process, but we all have our own method.
No, I'm with you because I will find things,
Yeah.
and I too tend to print things out
Yeah.
too.
Old school.
I'm a yeah, I am. I'm tactile.
Me
It's
too.
like um you know, my question to people as far as trying to learn their learning style is
Yes.
how when you read a book, well, number one, do you actually like to read books?
Mhm.
I guess that should be the question. But the other thing is, do you want to read a physical book, or do you do it on a Kindle? And when people say, "Oh, on a Kindle," that tells me where their learning style is
Yes.
versus having a physical book. I mean, I drive my wife crazy because when I travel, if I see a book, I have to have it, and she's
Yes.
like, You need to stop." I'm,
Yes.
I just love. I mean, I've got books in here in my office. I haven't read yet, and she's like, "You've got to. If you're gonna get a book, give a book away." And I'm like, I can't. I need this book, or the person that I know needs this book hasn't come into my life yet. So that's
Yes.
my thinking.
Ah, that's beautiful. I have the same affliction. I share that same affliction, and I think though of all the character flaws to have, that's not a bad one for us to share.
Exactly, exactly. It's not like I'm collecting old cars when we don't have the room for it. So
Exactly.
I agree with you. Before I give you the last question, Professor Michelle Travis, let everybody know how they can get a hold of you. And I know this isn't uh, Dads for Daughters isn't your only book. The other one, Mom has two jobs. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
So how can
Um,
people get a hold of you?
Fantastic. Well, you can find me on my website, michelletravis.net. You can also find me on the University of San Francisco School of Law faculty page, where I have all my information and bio there. So michelletravis.net or USF Law faculty page. And thank you for shouting out my other book. I actually had a side project. This is a bit unusual for a law professor, but my book, My Mom Has Two Jobs, is actually a children's picture book. So for young children, and it's really a celebration of working moms. So it highlights moms um, sharing both their mom role and what other job they might have. So it shows moms in a wide range of roles, from lawyer to doctor to secretary to chef to pilot to engineer. And it's just a really fun children's book that I hope can do two things. One, celebrate working moms and identifying both our work at home, inside and outside of the home as work, but also to kind of let girls and boys see women in lots of different roles at a very early age. And I'm hoping to, at some point, do the follow up book, My Dad Has Two Jobs, to accomplish the same things for all those amazing working dads out there.
Beautiful. My mom, God bless her, she had two jobs, raising me, and so I have this. I keep wanting to do this idea. So this is I don't know if I'll ever be able to do it, but because my mom did work two jobs, it taught me how to cook for myself. Not just the old days with the TV dinners, the frozen
Yes.
TV dinners. The thing I learned to cook was meatloaf. Every time I make meatloaf, it's different. Either I'm using turkey meat or I'll use
Yes.
regular beef. The seasonings are different. The amounts of I mean, so here's my idea.
I
I
love it.
want to create a YouTube show, and I'd interview people. They come to the house. So the next time you're in Colorado, you
Yes.
come on over, Michelle, and that's what I do. I would make sort of like Jerry Seinfeld's Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee, how he
Yes.
matches the car with the comedian. I want to try and match
Match the
the
meatloaf.
meatloaf recipe with the guest. I think it
Yes.
would be a lot of fun. That's just me.
I think you're onto something very big and important here. I really do.
I
And
just
I will come share that meal with you.
perfect, perfect. like I said, it's on the back burner. So anyway, before the last question, Michelle, thank you so much. I am so happy we were able to connect. I am such a huge fan of LinkedIn, and again, when I see people putting out some great information, your book, Dads for Daughters, I had to reach out to you. So, again, I am so grateful that when people accept my connections on LinkedIn and then even accept the invite to come onto this podcast, thank you so
Thank
much, Michelle.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I'm so grateful for the work that you're doing to support dads and fatherhood, and it's important work and to have a community and a platform for dads to connect with each other. So thank you for that important work.
Well, thank you. So here's the last question.
Okay.
Michelle, what are you looking forward to tomorrow? What are you looking forward to tomorrow?
Okay. Well, I'm going to answer that question in two ways, both literally and a little bit more figuratively. So, literally, tomorrow, actually, tomorrow, I am taking my older daughter to a dance competition, which I'm very excited about to finally see her on stage again after the pandemic and practicing in our living room for a year and a half. So, I'm excited about that. And I'm also taking my other daughter on what is probably her last driving lesson before she takes her driver's test next week.
Good luck.
Yes, that's the correct phrase to use. So I'm literally looking forward to that tomorrow, actually tomorrow. And in broader, sort of thinking about tomorrow in a little more broader scope. One of the things that I'm really looking forward to, I wanted to do a little shout out for some work that I'm doing with a nonprofit organization called Fathering Together. We're starting,
Yes.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
right. You're all of the dads that you work with would, would love to be connected with this organization too. We're starting a campaign coming up soon. It's coming up in a couple of weeks, and it's going to run through Father's Day called hashtag This Working Dad Cares. And it's a way for working dads to kind of share their love for their kids, their work family juggle, their support for family leave, and so forth. So, looking forward to some conversations with that new campaign.
What's the hashtag again, Michelle?
Hashtag This Working Dad Cares.
Perfect. Well, Professor Michelle Travis, University of San Francisco, one of my favorite cities. Actually, one of my favorite airports too. But
Yeah.
that's another episode. Again, Michelle, thank you so much. I know Dads for Daughters is a book that is impacting lives now and for a long time. And what you're doing, your research, is going to help so many parents out there. So, again, thank you so, so much.
Thank you. It's been so fun chatting with you.